This is episode 62 of our talk, and today I have Natalie Rigby at my guest. Do I pronounce that right? Rigby or Rigby? Rigby?
It's Rigby.
Rigby. Natalie is art historian, curator, and broadcaster. She is an inclusion-focused curator with specialisms in modern and contemporary British art. Natalie's practices center around making art exhibitions and collections accessible to everyone and demystifying academia to open up the industry to all audience. And that to me was very interesting as an academic myself. She has a substantial experience working within the museum, culture, and arts industry. Knowledge areas include inclusive exhibition development and delivery, fine art curation, collections development, museum and curatorial career coaching. And on top of that, she's open if you have a great project. Right?
Yeah.
So welcome, Natalie. I'm so happy to have you as my guest.
It's a pleasure. I don't get asked to do these things very often. It's usually me doing the interviewing. So
Yeah,
it's quite nice actually.
great. So you like to demystify academia and make art approachable. Can you explain to us what that exactly means and how you came to that?
So it started actually a long time ago. I had my first job in museums in 2002, and I had a great mentor. But their ethos at the time, and his name was Brian, and his ethos at the time was family friendly, and it was really important to him. And when I started working in museums, he noticed I had what he used to call an edge.
Okay.
And so he kind of put me to work, as it were, with teenagers. And I found that I had a real rapport with teenagers, and it's stayed with me all the way through. And we always talk about teenagers, don't we? Because they're
Yeah.
kind of the lost audience in museums, aren't they?
In art in general. Yeah.
Yeah. So I found that it was kind of my thing, which was quite helpful. But through kind of talking to, I mean, I talk to a lot of people. I, and I'm very good at asking questions. I found that it's not there's no physical barrier to going into a museum and experiencing art. It's all mental and emotional. There are barriers.
Yeah.
So I then became really interested in how to break those barriers down. So that's when we started looking at how we interpret our art and how we make our shows. And so the way I did it was to do it with a bit of tongue in cheek and not to take ourselves too seriously. We'd kind of put a spin on an exhibition title, and then we would kind of create a bit of spin in the exhibition. And so the exhibitions I used to curate, or still curate actually, I haven't stopped doing it. They kind of they're just friendly.
Yeah.
And they have the academia, but it's in a very friendly way. So then people don't feel like they can't interact with
Yeah.
the work.
Yeah.
And also
That's so true. I had this experience in the Netherlands. I'm a Dutchie in London. In the Pont Museum for Modern Art, in front of a work of Bill Viola, and he had it's a massive. It's a mounting mount on the wall, videos in slow motion, as you know, his work, and it depicts the four seasons. It depicts life, death, teenagers giggling, making a fool out of what they saw with just a paper. I had to fill it, and I started to communicate with them, and everything changed. And they thanked me because suddenly they were taking seriously. Is that something that you feel, that they are taking seriously and not put down? So, from this is the almighty art, and you have to look at it that way. But that you can approach them.
Well, that's what I started doing. So every time
Yeah.
if I saw somebody who was kind of, you can always tell when someone's not enjoying something, can't you? So I
Yeah.
would just go up and go, what do you think about that then?
Mm.
And then we would have a conversation, and that's where it all starts, really. Because I mean, you can place a picture on the wall, you can put an art installation in a space, but unless you can connect with it, there's no, you just, it's a way, well, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time, but it's about finding that intellectual level. And I don't want art, well, I don't want art to be elitist.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it always has been, and it's going back that way. I controversially will say it. It's becoming something for the kind of upper classes and those who have studies, whereas it should be for everybody. It should be for everybody, shouldn't it?
I absolutely agree with that. It should be for everybody. And I had a conversation, my last interview, with an artist. And well, as you see, I do representational art. And she too, and she said, because it's most inclusive. If you put a block, just like a block in a square of in a room, and they have to read a whole page of a made up philosophy about it, people feel excluded. They have like, I don't have that intellect. I don't know what they're talking about. And so you push people away instead of, and art is one of the most important things we can have in the world. It's made redundant in schools, but it is the most important thing, because the energy that comes off it, the narrative it tells, the relation that people can have with it and feel good, just freaking feel good and have a happy feeling when they are surrounded with, that needs to be for everyone. I totally agree with you. Totally.
The great thing about COVID is when we were all kind of shut in our houses and we didn't know what to do, that is the first thing that everybody turned to, wasn't it? It was art and music, and it was therapy.
Yeah.
And in a way, we should be reflecting that in exhibitions and making them more accessible, and not kind of putting it on a pedestal, really. It should be something that we can all kind of party with.
Yeah. And what role do you think auction houses also play in this?
Oh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's difficult because of it's the price tag, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
know now that I always had like, it's ridiculous for something that I would not even consider art. They ask the most ridiculous prices, but that are hedge funds and investment bankers. Those are
well,
not art lovers. And there you have, yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah, because
well,
how much does that exclude people? They'll see this and they think, ooh, that's never for me.
I suppose the most difficult thing for me, which I always found difficult actually, is the fact that there are people buying art and they're spending a lot of money on their art and they're building these amazing collections, but then they're going into a house, and then they're not getting viewed.
Yep.
And then, yeah, and that for me is, I mean, I can't stop anybody doing this, but it's problematic. So my for me in my career, I would go and try and seek out these pieces of work and get them out of those private collections and
Yep.
get them on display, and that became really, really important to me.
And that's difficult too,
It is.
because not all private collectors do that. Because in my research, I studied the collection, I studied the directorship of Eddie de Wilde. He was director of the museum in Amsterdam. I did also museum studies. And he was able to get in his farewell exhibition, La Grande Parade, the most exquisite art from private collectors. And they did this because of him on personal title. So it's so difficult to ask that. The insurance prices going through the roof. So how do you do that?
Well, luckily, when you, I mean, as I've discovered becoming freelance, it then becomes a little bit more difficult. When you work in a museum, you've got the amazing government indemnity scheme,
Oh, yeah.
which you can apply for. But yeah, you're right about insurance. It becomes really difficult. I mean, I suppose really talking about private collectors, I should talk about Charles Saatchi,
Yeah.
because if he hadn't have opened his collection in the 90s, I want to say 90s.
90s, I think. So, yeah.
When he showed the YBAs, I don't think it wouldn't be a thing now. If they would,
No.
all of that artwork would still be in private houses
Yeah.
and kept very much
Yeah.
off view.
Yeah.
So
and those ridiculous stories about some Japanese guy who buys a sunflower by Van Gogh, and when he dies, he wants to be buried with it. And I have like, you know, yes, I create art, and when I get commissions, that is for the person, but it stays in the family. And maybe at one point it goes out of that family. It is not. Art needs to be there for a lot of people to enjoy and
well,
not closed off. Yeah.
no, you're right. The other thing, sorry, you're never going to shut me up.
That's good.
The other thing I find really frustrating is when you go to museums, and you've got a little kind of barrier, and you're kind of funneled to see artwork. So
I always call that the IKEA syndrome.
Yeah. So you're kind of funneled in a queue to see these artworks, and then people aren't actually looking.
No.
They're taking a photo with their phone and moving on, and they're not experiencing
People nowadays experience art in a museum through their phone. I have like, why the heck do you do that?
Yeah.
If you do that through the phone, then why not do it online?
Well, I try because my children they're 11 and 15, and so they've always, I mean, they're going to have an art. They have no choice, really. they have to be into art. They've got no choice. But I've tried to encourage them to look, look with your eyes. It sounds so stupid, but you have to look at everything with your eyes. You can't do all this phone stuff. You have to actually experience it. And when we went to see sunflowers at the National Gallery, I always remember they were really nervous about holding up the queue because there were all these people wanting to take their photos with their phones. And they were like, oh no, we need to move on. And I'm like, no, take a moment. They can wait. There's another 4 hours till the museum shuts. There's plenty of time. Just take your time and experience it.
Yeah. And that in itself is not right. That people have to stand in a queue to take a photo and to move on. That is not art experience. And the camera, this is an artificial eye. Your own eyes are the same as the camera. And if you learn to see rather than thinking what you see, you need to do that without your phone. Otherwise, you can never really see.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, I kind of understand it for capturing memories. I kind of get it for that aspect, but just to go and take a photo and then move on and not actually look, I just don't get that.
No.
When I took my children to see Guernica in Madrid. And
huge, right?
It's amazing, and it was such an experience. But they don't have no cameras on that floor, and that is brilliant because there's just a whole crowd of people just almost having this mutual connection with this painting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about hidden histories. I like that. And unheard voices. So that has to do with exhibitions you created. And is this because of the lack of this in general when it comes to art exhibitions in galleries as well as in museums? What is the interest in these hidden histories? What is it that you want to bring forward?
It's funny, really. I've never really had because I mean, there's a lot of things about woke at the moment, but
Mm.
throughout my career, there's never. I mean, I don't really see the world that way. So there, I mean, it to be fair, it's not been intentional. It has just been about being that inclusive, that
Yeah.
no one is excluded. So I've always made sure that there are works in exhibitions by everyone, and they're experienced by everyone. And yeah, so, but I mean, I look back at my career now, and I kind of look at exhibitions that I was doing in 20 years ago, and we were doing, you know, women artists.
Yeah.
And we were highlighting that. And I know it's a big thing at the moment, but we
Yeah.
were all doing that a long time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
But it just, yeah, I think sometimes, yeah. But I mean, two of the exhibitions that I really loved, that I worked on, was Soaring Spirits, which was about artists working with disability. So that was about kind of finding artists that used art to kind of help them mentally and physically. And again, you've got artists. We were talking earlier about mouth painting.
Mm-hmm.
There are these amazing artists that do this, and there's just been that amazing Sarah Biffin show at Philip Mould Gallery. But I mean, in our collection at Falmouth Art Gallery, there's Thomas Looney, and he actually had paintbrushes strapped to his shoulders because he didn't have any arms, and he would do, these amazing realist paintings of boats, which, as you can imagine, back there, they didn't have photography.
Yeah.
So you just, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? And how can you not display that? How can you not give that time and space?
Yeah. You're so right. And I think even that is less shown than even female artists and that is big now because also of that book, The Story of Art Without Men. And it has always been an issue, but there's so many people who create stunning art. Really, they know the skill, they know the craft, but they don't do it with their both hands because they simply don't have it.
Well, this is it. I mean, that book is great. I have to say, she's done a fantastic job. And if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have all of these amazing women artists now being collected by museums. Because I mean, there aren't enough. There isn't enough representation in museum collections. There isn't.
No.
And if there is, it's not researched. So they may have these amazing artists with these amazing, you know, stories, but the research just isn't there. And that's another frustration, is that there is no money, there's no funding to explore that. Unless you're doing a PhD. And there's not, I mean, I don't have time to do a PhD, but
God, I was in one, building on what I did in the Netherlands, and then personal reason I stopped it. But I'm thinking it's always itching. But it is so necessary to do this research. The negativity for me is not so much doing the research, as well as if you want to make it into a PhD and get funded, you have to go under the umbrella of what's already there. And then it doesn't fit under the umbrella because it isn't there. So I decided to be an independent scholar, and I do it in my own time, and try to find an angle.
I think what's great about the last few years in particular, and it is, and especially with BLM, is it's highlighting the horrific nature that we have, especially the British Empire, which I'm not a fan of, by the way, have attained all of these objects and things, and those horrible stories that have just been wiped out. And those stories need telling, and we need to acknowledge where they are and where they've come from. But we also need to give some stuff back too, because we shouldn't have some things. We
No.
should be giving them back.
There's so many artifacts that do not belong here, those are part of the culture of someone else. You can't just say, okay, because I now suddenly own your country, which you don't, by the way, in my opinion, take their artifacts. It's appalling, but I've seen this too in Austria when I went there to museums. They have it too. I think everywhere they have it. It's everywhere.
I've actually been saying for absolutely years, although it's just a bugbear and, you know, nothing's going to happen. Although I'd love to be that campaigner that changes the world. Yeah, I go into museum stores and I look at some pieces of art that don't belong in that museum collection, and they should be in a different collection because it's that area, and it's so frustrating, and they're just kind of, because it's not relevant to that collection, it's just in the store and it's gathering dust, and you think, oh, even if you just gave it on long-term loan to that museum where it's really relevant and they could show it to their audience and it's so relevant to that audience, it would be great. But you can't, unfortunately, I've learned you can't change the world.
Well, I always say, I quietly and silently try to change the world through my art. I do inclusiveness, as you can see. And I think also we have to believe that we have to seed it. So plant the seeds, do some research for yourself, write about it, because to be honest, I believe if that's a problem or frustration, make it into a project.
Well, that's where I am at the moment, which is what's great about being freelance, is I'm now doing the things that I'm really, really passionate about. So at the moment I've got a real thing about I don't know how to say this, about hidden abuse in relationships and how that manifests in artworks. So that's my thing at the moment, which is why I shouldn't say this, but I was a little bit frustrated with the Katie Hessel book, because but then again, the whole idea of that book is to show women in their own stories and not about the way that they've interacted with men. So I get it, but I do think there's further work that could be done to kind of delve into those stories, because
especially Camille Claudel.
So there's a lot of work that could be done there, and I can't see anyone doing it. So I'd like that to be me.
Well, I would say start.
Well, this is I have already started. I've started researching now, but I don't know what it's going to manifest into. But I've started reading, and some of the stories are absolutely shocking. Absolutely, but
yeah, and it's so important. And this is then within the art world and female artists, but abuse and hidden abuse in itself, domestic abuse,
but it's not just women.
That's not just women, it's also within the LGBTQI plus world. That's the same. It's human versus human. But I also know, because I did a project about it, art book with stories, and then I created the art next to it, word art mostly, is that people turn away. They don't want to know because it's difficult. So they rather see a Camille Claudel as she was crazy and went up into asylum, and I didn't know. She was manipulated and abused by Rodin. And you can say whatever you want, but I can read that from miles away. And she was abused by her family. And she was alone. And she had to do that on her own. She was passionate. She was not crazy. And then you have these silly films, the biopics, that show that she was almost hysterically on her knees, collecting clay from as if she was crazy. So she gets a label. She wasn't crazy at all. And I can also say she was a better sculptor than Rodin himself.
Well, this is it. I mean, this is what we were saying about hidden stories. Is there are so many people that don't get the credit that they deserve, because they've been sidelined by these powerful characters.
Yeah.
And it's about time we heard their voices, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Fantastic. I hope you will really dive into this and write about it, and maybe build on that book.
Yeah. I mean, that book is amazing. She's done such a great job.
Yeah.
Of not highlighting the men, and it is seriously without men. I don't think you see a single man in that entire book, and that's great, but there is further work that needs to be done, I think.
But that's the great thing. She placed a very good book. It's the first seed. It's the first of its kind, and now researchers, and maybe we as female, need to dive into it and take it further. That's how academia works, right? We build on each other. And so, yeah, fantastic.
Well, I have a radio show where I interview artists every week, which is just my little hobby, really. And inevitably, we will talk about emotions, and we will talk about trauma, and we will talk about how that affects their art. And it's really sometimes it can get really deep. And the interview I did on Tuesday, I mean, we were tearful talking about the work. And I mean, that capturing that emotion in some way is great. And that's what artists do, is they put their emotions out there for everyone to see. And that's a hard thing to do. I couldn't do it. My barriers are up all over the place.
You have to. If you're an artist, then you have to. I mean, yeah, I can't say it any other way. And I'm also a classically trained musician, but then I got tinnitus and couldn't play anymore. But so that was to start with, a great outlet, till I became a professional, and then things start to change. You can't hear and listen to music anymore without analyzing it. I have a little bit that also with art, how the material is used, if the colors, if they know what they're doing, if they had a form of skill, because we are very de-emphasizing the skill as such, which is a shame. It's very a shame. And I want to keep that high, but it's all emotion. It's emotion. Every portrait I paint is emotion, pure. I paint portraits as a story because it's emotion. And yeah, so that is great. So I really hope you continue to do that, and maybe I follow up behind you. Yeah. And so we talked about storytelling for you, and I want to see how you experienced how within the narrative. So you create your exhibition. It's all about storytelling, right? And how do you have experienced that people who come there connect the visitors with that art and with that story within your exhibitions?
I think it's just about giving that extra information, and it's okay having a label saying what the work's about and the story behind it, but the best thing you can do is have a conversation, I think, because it's only when you start asking questions that it then becomes more interesting.
Yeah. And people dare to say something, right? If you ask them something.
Absolutely, because I mean, I think some people are, I mean, I think it's quite hard going into a museum and having an opinion, especially with this elitism that we talked about earlier. people are scared to interact,
Mm.
and that's such a shame, because that, I mean, that is what it's all about, really.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So kids and the connection with art, that should play an important role. And I believe in a more in a way that it's not made into a playground for kids, but really taking them seriously, what we talked about. You emphasize on that. And what is your experience when you see kids around art? What does it do with them emotionally when you have asked those questions, when you get the conversation going about that piece or the exhibition? Do you see emotional change within them?
I mean, I've worked with children from, I mean, three months up. So I've worked with babies up, and I think that I mean, they experience creativity in such a different way. Even from being a baby and only being able to see black and white, and then developing your sense of color is just it. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I've worked with babies. I've seen mothers with their children with an artwork, and you know, they want to touch it. They want to kind of, you know, they want to touch it. And in a funny kind of way, I'm not sure that. I mean, I understand what you're saying about a playground, because there has to be limits, and there has to be some kind of there has to be some rules, obviously.
Yeah, they can't just like, because they are very, they need to feel it literally with their hands when you talk little kids. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, what the Sains, I don't know if you've seen what the Sainsbury's Centre are doing at the moment. So they have literally made a kind of centre where they've got things that you can touch and you can interact with. And if you think about Barbara Hepworth, I have to talk about Barbara Hepworth because I'm in Cornwall. But Barbara Hepworth, the whole point of her sculpture, and she writes about this and she talks about this and she was interviewed about this. The whole point of her sculpture is the fact that you are meant to touch it.
Yeah.
You are meant to connect with it. You are meant to walk around it. You are meant to walk away from it. You are meant to be able to feel it and connect with it. And so actually, I think that there do have to be some things that you can touch. I mean, obviously not paintings. We all know we're not meant to touch paintings.
No.
But with sculpture, why not? Actually,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah.
If it's not going to harm the work in any way, why shouldn't we?
Yeah.
I got really frustrated with the Tate in St. Ives, because they had this amazing Norm Garbo wire sculpture, and they had placed it right next to the door. And I went back to see it because I loved it. And the next time I went to see it, they'd taken it away because it was getting blown in the draft coming through the door, because it was right next to the door. And I was just like, oh, that's so frustrating, because his sculptures, the reason they're made of wire and they have that tension is so that when the air hits them, they make noises.
Yeah.
And so by removing that sculpture, they'd actually taken away the artist's intent.
Wow. Is that lack of knowledge?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say, because obviously, who am I? Who am I to say you don't know what you're talking about? But yeah, I mean, that's really frustrating for me. And I think, you know, when you're followed around a museum by a security guard because your 6-year-old has gone up and put their fingers on a plinth, it's a bit much, really. And I think that's the other thing about being family friendly, is it's about the way we interact with people, and this do touch. There are better ways of doing it. There are more accessible ways of doing it. I mean, if we were doing it right, the security guards would be there, but they'd be taught how to interact with the public.
Yeah.
And so,
But
and
even
so
with, yeah.
yeah, and so they would be going up to these children and saying, oh, you know, do you know why we're not meant to touch that, as opposed to do not touch it, you'll get in
Yeah,
trouble, I'm going
but
to
they do
call
that. They do that with adults too,
yeah, well,
because
that's
I remember that I was visiting museums, and I'm interested in the brushstroke, so it was too small to see that from behind that line that I wasn't allowed to cross. So I stepped with one foot over it and leaned forward just to study that way of it. I mean, you. Ooh, okay. I didn't know I was criminal. So yeah, it's not very inviting.
no, it's not, and that's where that elitism is, I think,
Yeah,
because that's people at the top saying, this is your job, you need to do this, and it gets lost in translation, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah. And it's weird, to be honest, because if you know that the Night Watch of Rembrandt was painted on a very tiny platform behind his house in the open sky because it was too big. Cut the part off also, but yeah, so it should be more accessible, definitely, definitely. And so when we slightly go back to this inclusiveness and diversity, how can artists themselves participate in that with either their art or within collaborations with artists?
How do you mean?
Well, I think that as artists, when we have a way of painting what we do, and there is someone who is painting with his shoulders because he has no arms, or with a mouth, or is a black artist because they have, where are they? You
Well,
hardly
yeah.
see them. And I can paint that, that's my inclusiveness. But how beautiful would it be if I could collaborate with them so that they get more to the forefront too, so that we can make something that is a hidden story that tells the story of my culture, but also their culture. And how can we, or is that too far?
I think that I mean, it always comes down to the audience, I think that sometimes we forget who it's for, we forget what it's for, and I think sometimes it's about, and I keep saying this, but it's about conversation. It's really hard with artists because they they shouldn't have any kind of restriction on what they do
No,
at all,
no.
because I mean, and that's what makes an artist, isn't it? It's the fact that you can um you can, I can't think of the word, oh dear, but yeah, with an
Well,
artist
I would
you can
define it
express
like this.
yourself.
You you have learned something, you have a skill, and I always say, learn the skill, make it your own, second nature, and then you can forget it, because when you are in that state that you can forget, you can express yourself completely.
So I think again, it's yeah, I mean, artists, and this is what makes a good artist really, is someone who can express themselves from their core
Yeah.
with absolutely no barriers whatsoever. I will always say I'm a failed artist because I studied fine art and I would have loved to have been an artist, but I couldn't do it because I have barriers up all over the place. And I cannot do that. I will never be a great artist. And I think that that's not recognized in a funny kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I think
Mm-hmm.
I think that being able to do that, to be able to express yourself with complete freedom, um, it's a skill that not everybody has.
No, it's true.
And actually,
It's true. Yeah.
and going back to children and
Yeah.
inclusivity, um, you have complete freedom of expression until you go to school, and
Yeah.
then it's kind of beaten out of you, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in a way, an artist is going back to their preschool self and being able to unleash that amazing visceral experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have read the books by Betty Edwards, and she was a teacher in school, and she said every child should learn this. You don't have to become an artist, but children express themselves when they are small, and they start to make the heads and the arms and the body, the stick figures, etc. But when they are 8 to 11, they want to see the world. They see the world and want to recreate what they see. And there we have the problem, because nowadays, because the real skill isn't taught anymore, there are no teachers who can do that.
No.
There they frustrate the kids because they draw an apple and they want this to be an apple, and then you don't get instructions how to do it, but you get told off.
So
And there you get a huge frustration for kids already.
well, it's also a massive knock to your confidence as well if you're being told that's wrong.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the time I was working in a school, and I went into a school, and I was working as a gallery person in a school. But I went in and they were doing work on zoo animals, and they were told to draw a giraffe. So, okay, you draw a giraffe, right? How do you think of a giraffe? It's got spots, it's got a little tail, it's got a long neck, it's got little horns, and it's got ears.
Huge eyes.
Yeah, and huge eyes. And so as long as it's got those elements, it's a giraffe, right? But all of the children were told that their drawings were wrong, and they were given a template which they had to trace.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, God, you can't do that. Because you can see all these children who thought they'd done these amazing drawings of giraffes going, oh, it's no good.
Yeah.
When actually everything that they'd done was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it also has brought the culture now of we de-emphasize skill. Why would we? We trace it. But that's coloring. That doesn't get to the emotion that you want to express. That's only when you use your own eyes and when you start feeling that person and have the conversation and talk with them or the family. And they sit for you and they talk and they tell. Then you start to learn and to see who that person is, because you can see what Leonardo da Vinci always said, look through. And now we all see these shells. We see empty shells of copied photos. Look through to who they are, because there are the emotions. There is where you capture that emotion. And that can be something that sometimes they don't see themselves anymore. And you paint it and they have like, wow. And that is already ruled out with kids, with all kinds of other implications of whole brain function. But that's another story. Very important, by the way. But that to me is very frustrating. Yeah. If I have to use that word, and I feel like that's no.
I just think that we need to get back. We need to get art back into schools, and we need to get the importance of art and humanities back into our education system. It's really important. It's so important. So, oh yeah, it just makes me really angry. And no,
you're right. Maybe we have to do something together. But let's talk about Cornish walks. You just said you live in Cornwall. I've never been in Cornwall, but I've seen, well, the most stunning pictures of Cornwall. And I had like, okay, tell me about the Cornish walks. What's that?
Okay, so I'm actually, because I'm 5 weeks post surgery. So I'm not meant to be, although I'm not meant to be working at the moment. So what Cornish Walks is it's my little business idea. So when I'm back to my fit 100% self, I'm going to be doing walks around the Cornish coast and retracing artists' footsteps, because down here we have this absolutely stunning scenery.
Yeah.
But we also have a whole history of artists that came down and experienced it from, well, pretty much as soon as the railway, or even actually before the railway was put in, because we had Turner coming down.
Yeah.
So Cornish Walks is about me taking people around the coast and showing them where the artist worked, telling the artist stories, showing them images of those views which they can see now, because some of them are still unchanged, which is unheard of these days.
Mm.
But yeah, it's about telling stories of the artists that lived and worked here those hundreds of years ago, and just allowing our visitors to, and our locals to experience that and learn about that.
Yeah, hidden stories again.
Yeah.
And narrative, yeah, and inclusiveness, because if there's anything like that, yeah, amazing. So last question. Do you have any advice for artists in their career to get more visible?
That's a really difficult one. I can't imagine what it must be like being an artist these days and having to have your whole life on social media, because I mean, art isn't. It's a business these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So all I would suggest to people is, well, I don't know what I could suggest actually. I mean, it's about getting your work out there, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think, yeah, well, I found for myself, social media, it's almost a type of pornography for art. They want to see everything, every brushstroke, behind the scenes. But the real life, like real life, going out there and do open studios, but also talk with other artists. That's why I have Art Talk. I want to talk with people like you, talk with other artists, and yeah. So yeah, it is difficult. It is.
I think
Yeah.
you're right about that interaction. I think that people do want to see behind the scenes, and I've always said that, do you know Heat magazine, the celebrity gossip magazine?
No.
I kind of feel that these days artists kind of need to live like a celebrity, and they need to kind of let people into their, you know,
Yeah.
into their life, as it
Yeah.
were, because that's
Yeah.
what people want. They want to
Yeah.
know the person behind the work. They want to know where it's come from, who they are, what they do on a day-to-day basis. And that's not easy to give up if you're a private person. But I suppose that would be my only advice, is think about your process, because actually I think sometimes the process is more important than the product.
Yeah, but that's what I always say to people who say they're an artist, but they focus on the end product instead of the process. And I always say, when I mentor someone, hey, embrace the process and the journey, because that's the only thing you have.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing. It's a learning journey, and it's where you experience every emotion under the sun. Because it's not that even when you're very highly skilled, everything always goes as you want it. And so it is important to embrace the journey in whatever you do, but as artists for sure. And I can imagine that people want to know who I am and want to know what I do and why I do it. And I tell that, and that's not a problem. I'm very open in that sometimes I want to be alone with the portrait I paint, especially commissions. I can't show them. I can't show the process. That's not mine. That is of my client. So, yeah. And I won't unless I get permission to show the end result. And that's something else. And maybe a time lapse here or there. But the time lapse is also problematic, because a lot of people think, wow, that is quick. I need to paint that quick. No. painting is silence and slow down time, which is so important these days. We are rushed. We all are in this world as if we constantly have a cyber taker behind us who wants to attack. Slow down time and shut off all internet and phones and all that jazz. Yeah.
I think the only thing I will say, which I do say a lot to artists, and that's, make sure you're charging the right money. Because I think sometimes artists undercharge for their work because they find joy, joy in themselves when they're working. They don't want to charge proper money for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, don't be scared. Don't be scared to put a hefty price tag on your work, because it's a piece of you. It's a piece of you.
It's a part of me. And it becomes a part of them. And it's also a very. I always say, let's talk in the financial world. It's an investment for life. And I'm currently working on a commission, which is part one of a commission. And she said, and I always keep people in the loop. So she said to me, "Oh, Karen, I have never been in a gallery and never experienced art, but the way you do it, and you take me with you on your journey to a certain extent. Now I understand. What I receive later is so much more than a photo that I have somewhere." And that is the difference. And that is what you need to tell. That is what people need to know. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I keep calling myself a cultural terrorist. Because
I love that.
Yeah, because as soon as I hear someone say, I'm scared to interact with art, I don't want to go to my local gallery museum, I'm scared to step in the door, I almost want to grab them by the hand and go, right, come on then.
Oh, come on, now we go.
Yeah, I'll take you with me and we'll do it together.
Yeah.
Because I feel bad for those people who have that barrier, because art does it unleashes something. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. I really loved it. Where can people find you?
I have a website, which is alittleidea.org, which is my thing, because everything kind of starts with a little idea. So you can find me there. I've got an exhibition opening in 2 weeks in Falmouth, which is the big King Arthur show, which has been touring the country. So that's the Legend of King Arthur, a pre-Raphaelite love story. So it's been to London, it's been to Carlisle, and now it's coming down to Cornwall. So that's opening in a couple of weeks down here. There's also a book that accompanies that, which is available in all good bookshops. And
Great.
there's also there's a card game that's just come out, which I've worked on, which again is King Arthur. And there's a jigsaw too coming out in August. No,
Wow.
July.
Oh, I've seen that. That's all on your website, right?
Yeah.
Great. I
So
put that in the show notes. Yeah.
I'm not doing a very good job of not working while I'm post-surgery.
As long as you feel good with it, I don't think it can hurt. Art has also a healing factor. So
I just need to keep my mind active, or otherwise I'd go a bit mental, I think.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, thank you so much for being with me.
No, thank you for having me.
And I hope to speak soon again.
Thank you.
I hope you keep going with the stories of that abused and then the artists. Really important.
I will do. I don't know what journey I'm going on, but I'm only starting, so we'll see.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.